Today I'm speaking with Erika Sams. Erika, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. It's nice to
I,
be here.
yeah, I appreciate your taking the time with me and being willing to share your story. I just want to give everyone a brief bio for Erika. Erika is an author and a blogger. She grew up in the South, which is where I am as well, here in Atlanta. She lived her entire life between Alabama and North Carolina. And where are you today, by the way?
North Carolina.
Okay. And she is the oldest of 9 children. Wow, that's a it's a big household.
Yes,
And
it
Erika
was.
was homeschooled her entire life in a strictly religious home. And Erika and her husband Brent have one child. How old is your child now?
He's 9 years old.
Wow, time flies,
It
and
does.
it's amazing. And I'm going to go into some of the religious background here in a few minutes. But in her late 20s, she did deconvert from Christianity, and at this point, she's very outspoken about her experience, and especially talking about things like religious trauma and letting people know that they're not alone and building community. And I've saw here that you also are an avid TikToker. I don't know too much about TikTok. What do you do there?
I do all kinds of stuff, pretty much whatever I'm in the mood for at that moment. It could be me sharing a thought on something going on. It could be me just doing makeup or making a video about my cats. It's all different stuff.
Very cool. If anyone wants to check out Erica's TikTok or Instagram, and I'll have all the links beneath our video, so you can go check her out. And just a quick icebreaker question: if you were at Starbucks, what would be your
Yes.
favorite drink to order?
It depends on what I'm in the mood for. Lately, I've been into the almond. I think it's like a flat top or something. I don't know, but I like the cappuccinos, anything with chocolate. I like Starbucks. Oh, and their passion fruit lemonade.
Nice, nice.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm a bit of an addict. I'm trying to break away from it though. Every time one of those articles comes through that says caffeine's good for you, I think, well, it's technically yes, but I can tell I'm an addict. It's time to break it. But
Well,
um,
there's also caffeine, and then there's Starbucks.
yes, yes,
There's
exactly,
there's coffee, and then there's Starbucks.
exactly. Well, I'd love to hear kind of your background and just where you're coming from. I know we've given a brief intro, but what was your childhood like, especially as it relates to religion and all the things you were taught?
So, I was born in North Carolina, actually. I'm the oldest of the children, so religion is just always something I knew.
Hmm.
I remember being a kid and just thinking like um, it was like Jesus was my best friend, and like I said, I was homeschooled my entire life, so I didn't have experience beyond pretty much going to church and being at home. That's what
Hmm.
I knew. That was my entire life.
Can I ask
So
about that? When you say
yeah,
homeschool, some people's homeschooling experiences are very broad, where they kind of do connect with different people. Would you
true.
say yours was more on the sheltered side or more on the
Very,
connected side?
very sheltered, very sheltered. Um, I don't know for sure, but that's kind of part of the reason I think we moved to Alabama when we did is because in Alabama they don't do like this cat tests and stuff to make sure that even though you're homeschooled, you're learning certain things. There's not as much accountability,
Hmm.
and the point of homeschooling was to keep us home and teach us what they believed and really control the information coming in.
Yeah, got to protect
Yeah.
you from the pagans.
Yeah, absolutely. God forbid I turn into an atheist.
Yeah. So, what would you say was the earliest memories you have of like things that you remember being taught at Sunday school or church or by your parents? What were some of the earliest stories or ideas you had?
Well, Bible study was one of the most important parts of school, actually. We would spend hours reading, especially the Old Testament, breaking down the all the stuff in numbers, the things you're allowed and not allowed to do.
Wow.
That my how like women when they're raped, they have to marry their rapist, that kind of stuff. Good children's stories.
Yeah.
Um,
The stuff about
and
don't eat shellfish.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that the lighthearted stuff about stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so that was like my parents actually told us as long as we knew the Bible, they didn't care what other stuff we knew or didn't knew.
Hmm.
The education part was pretty much a sham. There was a lot of stuff we were not taught. So
Like basics of math and science kind of stuff.
yeah, like for example, I remember in third grade, I and the only reason I know I was in third grade because I was in the Sunday school third grade class, and they give you these sheets of paper with a little quiz or something that you have to do. And it's a way to keep the kids entertained while the teachers let time pass. And so I had one and I didn't do it. And the teacher asked me, she's like, why didn't you do that? I'm like, well, I don't know how to read. Um,
Wow.
and she laughed at me and was like, a third grader who doesn't know how to read. Like, I think she thought I was messing with her. And I'm sitting there like, am I supposed to know how to read? Um,
Hmm.
so like that level. And I did. I learned I think that was kind of a awakening to my parents of maybe we should start teaching her stuff. um, so
Can I ask you a question about that? And this is jumping a little bit ahead, probably. So we're going to come right back. But a, a lot of the groups that I would have interacted with is my early childhood, and certainly just in the broader scopes that I got connected with as I got older. Part of the reason that education wasn't as important, at least for the ladies, was because there was an assumption that the best path, and really the only path, is to be a wife and a mother, and hopefully
yep.
a mother of a lot of kids, but at least a mother of
Oh
some
yeah.
sort. And that was the best life. And it's almost like yes, you can learn other things, but don't let them be a distraction from the main point. Unless there's a few obvious exceptions, like if you're a world-class missionary that God's called you to preach the gospel to some tribe. There are women that are called to do that, especially in like medical missions. There are
Yep.
women doctors that are supposed to, but by and large, in our circles, women were supposed to be focused on, as Titus 2 talks about, being discreet, chaste, keepers at home, lovers of your husband and children, all
Yeah.
that stuff. Would you say that was an equivalent experience for you?
I'm nodding a lot. Yes, yes.
Okay.
um, yeah, there was one future that I had, and there was basically a single expectation. Um, I was basically my father's until I became my husband's. I
Hmm.
was to live at home until I get married, and then I move in with the man I marry. Um, basically, there's always someone that has ownership over you.
Hmm.
Um, it's called leadership, but it's
So it's like
ownership.
a dependency and an authority, and they would probably say it like an umbrella of protection, but it was basically like you're
Absolutely.
under someone's authority all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like your identity is you're supposed to be that woman, which was always a hard thing for me because I've never been a quiet person. I've always been very loud and opinionated and, the laugh that makes
Thus
everyone go
TikTok.
calm down. Yeah, that's TikTok. Um, and so that was always hard for me. Like I remember so many times if we went out somewhere when we came and I talked anywhere around my parents, I was just already prepared to come home and my dad be like, that thing you talked about or that thing you said, make sure you don't do again. Um, which
Hmm.
made me very self-conscious about anything that I said or did. The my my parents actually called me the second mom because I basically helped raise the children. My mom would kind of deal with, I guess, the little bit she could, and then leave me to watch the kids, be in charge, as they called it, and stuff. And so, to me, and even to strangers, people would be like, "How can you handle that many children?" Oh, it's fine because the oldest ones take care of the younger ones.
Yeah.
It's easy. It's easier once you have more kids. You have less responsibility. Um,
I saw that a
and
little
so
bit with
that
the Duggar story too. That's probably a parallel.
I see stuff about the Duggars and I go, that's familiar, that's familiar, that's familiar. The whole quiverful thing. My dad quoted all the time that he
Oh,
would
really?
say he's richer than Bill Gates because he had all these children. We could be living in a tent, which happens sometimes, and he'd be like, I'm still richer than Bill Gates because I've got all these kids and he's only got two.
Yeah.
you know. Um, so there was definitely that expectation of like I did that with my siblings and then I would have my family and my role would be to cook, to clean, to raise the children, and that's it. The only exception would be if I've always loved writing and stuff, and if that took off and I made a bunch of money off of like creating stuff, then great, awesome. Basically it's either you be a stay-at-home mom who takes care of her husband or you better be a millionaire.
Right.
Those are your options.
In terms of the option, the first one, to be a wife and a mother, and we're just to clarify before I say this, we're not in any way disparaging motherhood. Obviously, it's a beautiful part of life
No.
and wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, we have 4 kids ourselves. You have a child. You know, there's
Yes.
so much beauty to it. It's endless, the beauty, and
Yeah.
it's a glorious thing. And you know, we love our kids
Yeah.
in every way to death. But um, the idea, though, that not the only thing you're good for, but it's the primary thing you're good for, and especially the idea that this is, in terms of your worldview, this is basically a picture of you and God. Like, you know, there's God as the authority over Christ, Christ over the church, the leadership, the male leadership of the church over the families, the male leadership in the families over the wife and children, and obviously the husband and wife together over the kids. But this
Yeah.
idea is that you are mimicking, like, you know, just like it is in heaven, so let it be on earth. You're mimicking the authority structure, and so therefore, it's the most important thing you could do is to exemplify this. For a lot of people who grow up in it, it becomes so beautiful to them. Like, they're like, no, no,
Yeah.
you're misinterpreting it. This is not a, a burden. This is not a bad thing. To be a wife and a mother is the best calling on the planet. Um, did you feel like you just couldn't wait to start that part of your life? Did you feel like how did you feel like happy that that was what might happen in your future?
Um, I had many times where I prayed that I would never have children. Um, I would be sitting at home, children would be screaming, and everything's just nuts and it's chaos. And I'd just be like, God, I don't care if I change my mind and ask you, don't ever let me have
Hmm.
kids. I did not. Um, there would be points where I would be like, oh, this is a great idea of like having a man and, then we have a family and stuff. But then if I really thought about it, I didn't want that. And I think what you were saying before, it's motherhood is beautiful. And if you're a stay-at-home mom and that's what you want to do, that's awesome. The thing that bothers me, and I think a lot of people, is that it's given to you as like, it's not the only option, it's the expectation. Like, this is, you're told who you are, this is who you are, this is your purpose. And to differ from that is to differ from what God wants for you.
Hmm.
Um, you have to listen to God to know what He wants, and then your father or your husband or a male leader in the church to tell you who you are and what your purpose is.
Hmm. And if you had vocalized your hesitancy to be a mother at some point, would there have been any backlash, or was it
Um,
acceptable to take a different path in any way?
on that specifically, I think it's just something we never talked about. It's just
Yeah.
that is what it was. Um, if there were things like my parents saw as disrespect or stuff, then I mean that's where the whole corporal punishment thing and the spanking and all that is problematic in and of itself. Um, but I remember that mostly with things that they would consider disrespect and stuff. I don't remember ever really talking about it, and that probably comes from not having the space to talk about it. Also, I think it comes too from the fact that it's this is all I knew. This was my entire world, and so it's like I didn't really know what options would be out there. I remember when I was close to graduating high school, and my mom told me, she's like, "We can graduate you, but if you plan on going to college or anything, like there's no way you can do it with the education you have.
Hmm.
So like you're just planning to be a wife and mother, right?" And I was like, I guess. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Send you on. You know, like that
Yeah.
was it. There was no me looking for a job, me trying to, have a career, nothing.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, I know I took us off track a little bit with my questions, and I apologize. I sometimes do that with
That's
my
okay.
rabbit trails. But take us back then to your story, and I wanted to ask maybe a good segue back to your the beginning part of it. You talked about the Bible. Maybe start with, what did the Bible mean to you all, in terms of like, what was it? What is, for anyone that probably most people that would be watching know what the Bible is, but what did it mean to you to have the Bible in your hands, and what did you pretty much see it as?
Okay. So I was raised in Presbyterian church, so evangelical.
Interesting.
That's what I knew. So the Bible was like the living, true Word of God. Break it down word by word in Sunday school and everything. Um, like pastors would do entire sermons on like one verse and what this one verse meant, you know. So it was word for word exactly what God wanted and wanted us
Mhm.
to know. My Bible was my most precious possession. I had multiple, but one specifically I remember being at a camp and like clutching it to my chest as I slept, and the whole um, thing around it ended up breaking off because I
Mm.
was like holding it to my chest. Every Bible I had was filled with notes and highlights and stuff. Um, I read it, I studied it. I felt like to be reading it, to be praying over it, all of this was to be in conversation with God.
Mm.
Um,
Did you ever hear that
I
quote that the Bible that's falling apart usually belongs to the person who isn't?
Yes, yes, and it's
It's like a
so
badge of
interesting.
honor.
It is, but I was falling apart is the thing. When I was a teenager, I remember under the Presbyterian teaching is God chooses people from before you're born. So I remember like laying in bed at night, shaking in fear, like terrified to go to sleep because what if I die tonight? Like it was a real fear that like tonight I'm going to die. And what if I wasn't chosen? What if
Mm.
no matter what I do, no matter what I say, no matter how hard I try, it's he didn't want me, you
Yeah.
know? And that was one of the most I had a lot of those times, but that one sticks out as one of the most terrifying times of my entire life. Of just that fear of I'm trying so hard, I'm reading my Bible, I'm doing my prayer. We're at church 2, 3 or more times a week. And you know, some people they will say, "Oh, I was in the church and like I was a part of it, but I didn't really believe it. I knew it was, whatever." I believed it to my very core. Like I held my Bible and it was like, this is real and this is breathing and this is mine and this is the closest I'm going to be to God until I go to heaven.
Hmm.
Um,
If I could
but
add to a little bit to the election thing, it's really interesting that you said that because I was expecting you to tell me you were from a Baptist background, which is interesting.
I've
Uh,
been there too. I've done Baptist, I've done Wesleyan, Presbyterian. I've hopped around a bit, but my childhood was at Presbyterian church.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, I ended up in like that was my last stage before my deconversion. I went to Bible college, and it's interesting. I actually, I became at least interested in studying election more in Calvinism at a Baptist environment. I went to Bob Jones for my first year. Do you know Bob Jones University? It's a very
No.
conservative Baptistic school. It's not Baptist per se, but probably
Okay.
a majority of people that go there would be Baptist or agree with the majority of that kind of theology. But you have to go to their regular college group sessions every day as your chapel, and then on Sunday mornings you go to the same exact place for your morning church. Like you do church together as a university,
Right.
but they do ask you to do separate church in the evenings, and they have a list, of course, of approved churches that you're allowed to pick from.
Of course.
And it was a Baptist church. And at the time, of course, I loved it because this man, like you talked about, he was an expositor of expositors. He was a Charles Spurgeon. He was a John MacArthur kind of guy. He would take you word by word through the Bible. He would take in all kinds of Old Testament passages and elaborate what the New Testament's background was for this verse. And he's
Yes.
preaching through Romans 8, 9, and 10 in the evenings while I'm there. And of course, Romans 8 talking about the glories of the gospel, and that you're securing in God because He's the one that did it, and everything will work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. And it's just this glorious, glorious set of verses. Really, if you're a believer,
Yep.
and just the promises of God are so clear and so beautiful. But then in Romans 9, it brings up this question of, Paul's kind of expecting this feedback. Well, if it's so true that God protects and keeps his people, if you're telling me election's real and it's glorious, then what in the world happened to Israel? Because he chose them and they all died in the wilderness. Like
Yep.
what's the deal? And then he talks about how God picks certain people to be his real people, and he makes a real clear point: Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated, before they're even
Yep.
born. And then he even says, Paul again anticipates these arguments, and Paul is thinking someone's going to say, God, if you're the one that created me and you created me as a vessel of dishonor or wrath, then why are you judging me? You made me this way. How can you judge me when you made me to not be elect? And his answer is simply, will the thing formed, and the thing formed is the word plasma in Greek, will the plasma say to the creator, why did you make me this way? Like, how can you argue against God? And it's really, for people that just say, oh, the Bible's not Calvinistic. If you haven't read Romans 9, it's definitely Calvinistic.
Yeah.
God is an elector, and especially if you read things like the book of Enoch and the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're all talking about election heavily. And so I see what you mean, like that fear of like, hey, Judas walked with Jesus for either 1 year or 3 years, depending on which gospel you're looking at. Judas walked with Christ as a disciple, and he was a son of perdition. Could I fall away? It's
Right.
very scary.
It's terrifying. And especially as a child, wherein it's like you watch TV shows as a child, and to you that's real because you're a child and that's happening in front of you. Um, when you're raised in this world, all of it's full force on you. The wrath of God storms would terrify me because I thought God was mad at me. Like as a child, laying in bed, like shaking, going, I'm sorry for this thing that I said earlier, or this thing I might do in the future, or whatever, anything. I'm so sorry, all of it, all of it. From a storm.
Hmm.
It's nature, but it was like the wrath of God on me.
And you're bringing up the issue too, if God is angry at you. What would you say was the issue there? Like, what was God so angry about with when he looks at people? Was what's his concern, or what deserves his wrath from what you were taught?
Um, the earlier childhood memories, I don't know. So it's a lot of it was just I'm sorry for whatever it is. Anything I might have said. Of course, disrespect was a huge thing. Make sure you're careful how you talk to your elders, your parents, what have you. As I got more into my teen years, really focusing on like lustfulness and stuff, the thoughts in your head. As a preteen teenager, I'm thinking that me thinking about kissing someone or even just looking at someone and having this feeling of attraction is a betrayal to my future husband. Like as
Mm.
a teenager, I'm committing adultery against someone I've never met.
Yeah,
That's a lot of pressure.
that is, and you're absolutely right, because the Bible talks about more from a man's perspective, but it says if you've looked at a woman lustfully, you've committed
Yep.
adultery in your heart. And so even just you may never even talk to that girl, but if you've undressed her, so to speak, in your mind, you
Yep.
violated her and you violated God's rules. It's very
Yep.
clear.
Yep.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And we were big on the purity culture and stuff. No dating till marriage, no
Okay.
kissing till marriage,
So if you'd
no,
wanted to be with a boy, would it have been like with a chaperone kind of situation?
for sure. But it would be also in the sense of um, they'd meet me at church, we talk at church, they come over to my father's house, they have dinner with the family. Um, Really creepy level, my parents wanted to build their own home. And within the home, they talked about having a glass room. It's made entirely of glass. So, like, if someone did want to come and see me, we would have to go into that room. So that if we had a private conversation, everyone can still make sure it's like the sock on the door, but now you're putting someone in a literal fishbowl of, yeah,
Yeah,
you don't do any touching at all.
right. That's a interesting level of oversight. It's creative, if nothing else, if not creepy. Yeah, make
A little
sure you're
creepy, a lot
make sure
creepy.
you're closed down. You mentioned purity culture. For anyone that doesn't understand that, and it's certainly mixed up with or intermixed with modesty culture and shame culture.
Yeah.
What does that look like practically? Like, what are some of the rules that you face besides the dating one, the chaperone issue? Like, what would it look like in terms of just, I guess a lot of it would be maybe what you would wear, or just even just how you would see yourself. But what was that like for you?
So purity culture, and back then we didn't call it that. We just called it staying pure till marriage. We
Right.
called it, true love waits. Like you said, the modest is hottest stuff. Um, to a certain level, as a woman, you're responsible for a man's purity with how you dress, how you talk, not tempting the man. And then making sure that your heart is protected. You're saving, as a woman, I'm saving myself for a man, only one.
Mm.
Um, and that's to the level of my very thoughts. Um, so purity culture was very strict for me. I had the purity ring.
Oh,
We
really?
weren't
Okay.
social. Oh yes, oh yes.
And
We
that's
were
pretty
not
much just
social.
like a promise, as if to God, that this ring keeps you pure until you can get the real ring from your husband at the wedding, right?
Right. More so, it's a promise to God, it's a promise to your father, and it's a
Okay.
promise to your future husband. So it's like all three. And you wear it on your wedding finger until you get that wedding ring.
And the
So
Can I clarify that is that primarily focused on? I think I'm correct in saying this, but it's primarily focused on virginity and really, I guess you'd say, mixed up with it, anything that looks like sexual activity, but especially virginity. That the idea is, if you do this activity, either if you go all the way or you go close enough that it's pretty pretty sullying your reputation, that you're basically now like used goods, and
oh yeah,
like you would have seen in the I think it's around the intro of I Kissed Dating Goodbye, the idea that when you're at your wedding
at
with
the
your
altar,
spouse, all
a
your
whole
like
line of people.
a whole lot of people are going to be there saying like, yeah, have a nice wedding, but by the way, I slept with your future husband too, and oh yeah, he touched me here, and like we
Yeah.
were intimate or whatever, and like you suddenly, your wedding is basically like a trash event. Was that how you would have seen it?
Absolutely. I think as far as the level of purity, it depends on the person. I was definitely a more extreme example, to the point where, no kissing, hand holding was supposed to be a like, you're solid, you're committed, you're definitely going to get married. So now you can hold hands. So it, and like I said, even the thoughts in your heart. Like I talked one time, I actually wrote an article as a teenager about how I had had a dream where someone wanted to kiss me, and I turned away and wouldn't kiss them. Like even in my mind, I was protecting myself, and my parents were like, "Good on you, that's amazing," you know.
Hmm.
um, and so what you said about being the, protecting yourself and the used goods and stuff, your purity, which purity to me was everything from my virginity to, my thoughts to my everything. Your purity is your value, especially as a woman. When you hear stories in church about people who have done stuff before marriage, oftentimes with a man, it's like, he did that, but I forgave him. With a woman, it's like, she did that, and wow, it's like a whole other level. Um,
Hmm. Very scandalous.
very, very. So you gotta protect yourself. Um, we I know the stories are shared a lot, but I lived the whole like rose, choose gum, chew gum presence, where basically you're in a often youth group environment, so the teenagers at church, and they'll pull out a rose. I'll use the rose example and hold it up. It's beautiful. It's perfect. You pass it around. You have everyone touch it, play with it, pass it to everyone else. And then you bring it back up to the front, and it's all torn apart and beaten up. And it's like, who would want this? Like, this is you if you give yourself away.
Hmm.
You're broken. You're basically worthless. You're going to get thrown out, because who wants that? Um, there was even, and I don't hear many people talk about this one, but I definitely remember it, where you pass a cup around and everyone spits into it. It's like, if you kiss someone, you're basically drinking out of that cup.
Hmm.
So
That's a mind job.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So they make it very like, you don't want to do this, you want to stay away from this, and then, like I said, for the women, it's, you also have to protect the man. Like, it's your responsibility. It's, you got all these men. Oh my God, the teenagers in church, the youth leaders in church, so often were like the sexy guys that went around and have their shirt off and shit. Like the type of guys, know are good looking and can kind of flaunt themselves in front of everybody. But when any girl has a shirt to a certain point, or a little bit of her shoulders showing, or you see her bra strap, suddenly it's, pull her aside, cover her, hide her, tell her don't do that again.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It Can I ask about that for a second? It seems like it would be harder for some women, especially like women who are naturally more curvy, to just to basically hide that. And it's almost like, not that the men in that group would have ever said we want you to look like a man. They certainly would encourage femininity, but it's like you can't you just can't be showy in any way. And so if
Hmm.
there's anything that shows your curves or your skin or anything, or even like you said, your even a bra strap, like that is, it should make you as a woman, I would assume, feel somewhat ashamed that you're showing too much.
Hmm.
And certainly, just from a guy's perspective, it creates a big world of secrecy where you, as a guy, number one, you know that you want to see more and you want to understand. Like, a lot of guys don't even know what a woman looks like in that culture. They're like, I literally, if I got married tonight, I wouldn't know what she's going to look like when I take her clothes off, because it's such a, like, don't even go there. There are some people
Hmm.
that, have a balance where they maybe see art in a fine art gallery or something, Baroque art or something.
Right.
So there's a bit of a balance that can happen, but for a lot of people, it's like there's a lack of knowledge and a secrecy, and it drives people to a point where they're living two lives. They're saying,
Hmm.
I am pure, I've got this facade. And you see it in some of these Duggar stories that have come out, but a lot of others where you you are the good Christian, you are the modest Christian, you are, even a teacher or pastor, and yet you have this inner life where you're like, I am I am so eager for sexuality to be part of my experience, and even for eroticism to be part of my experience. And it's been so nailed shut, so to speak, in terms of the way that we're supposed to look on the outside, that the only way you can really do it is if you're just naturally the kind of person that's very self-disciplined, when some people are. You kind of put it away and keep it, keep that door shut until you're married, or you live a double life. And a lot of people really struggle with
Hmm.
that. But then the other side impact, and I'd like you to, just respond to either one of these if you want to, when after I say this. But for a lot of people too, when they get married, they struggle then with enjoying themselves, because
Hmm.
when you tell someone over and over, don't let any skin be shown, don't think about it, don't fantasize certainly about anything, don't encourage anything, you're a stumbling block to the guys if you don't,
Hmm.
toe the line. And all of a sudden you're supposed to, in some sense, I think,
Flip a
be
switch.
flip a switch and just be so much that just your man's, greatest fantasy and greatest dream. And you're supposed to kind of, the expression I think I've heard is, be a lady in public and a whore in bed. Like that's not going to happen, because you have been so repressed. Would you say that that was either your experience or some of the people that you knew would agree with that?
Yeah. I gonna try to respond to all the things. I was um, I was ashamed of my curves. I've
Mm.
always had more hips and stuff, and like I remember just I would wear very baggy things and stuff. I wore the long skirts and everything. I felt like I had to hide my body. Um, and to this day, I kind of have a little bit of trouble with like, okay, what's not okay, and it is kind of hard for me with that. Um, as far as flipping the switch and getting to the point where you're married and stuff, I didn't make it till marriage.
Mhm.
So, um, I, and that was a really, really tough journey for me because, and I'm kind of go into it because there's a lot to
Sure.
it. I was in this suppressed, sheltered household until 18. Um, and then I basically essentially ran away from home. I went on a weekend trip and called him and told him I'm never coming back.
Mm.
And that began a journey for me of trying to figure out what is the real world. Also, I got to figure out how to get a job, how to do taxes, all these things because I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't prepared for this. The other thing is, I have to learn how to interact with men because that's going to happen in the real world. And I had been so suppressed that talking to any man, it was like, you're looking at someone like, could this be my future husband? And, be careful, like how you interact and engage. I would turn bright red every time I even spoke with a guy because I was so embarrassed and like had protected myself for so long that it was like I couldn't even have a conversation without getting
Hmm.
red and embarrassed. Um, and so then
That's amazing.
uh, a friend of mine was like, "You need to date. You need to date." I'm like, "I am not ready to date. I'm just trying to figure my life out." And part of that did come from that, like, still fear of protecting myself because even like I said, into my 20s, like religion was so important to me. God was so important to me. And I really believed it and meant it and did my best with all of it. So when she kind of pushed me into like dating and met with this guy, had my first kiss. It was terrible, as most first kisses are. And it was just like, where's the magic? Where is the whatever? And with my first boyfriend, we got as far as oral sex. And so then once we had broken up, um, I remember debating with friends of mine, well, what is virginity? Where's that line? Have I lost it? Is my all of my purity gone, even though I haven't gone all the way? It's oral sex. Is that, where's that line? Like basically trying to figure out how worthless you are. Like how much of your worth have you just completely lost and thrown in the trash? How much do you still have to give? And it
Hmm.
kind of sent me down a spiral very quickly, because especially coming from a household where it's not even any kissing till marriage. And now I've done this thing with this guy, and now we're not together because he cheated, and so now there's no going back from that. But now, like I've given a piece of myself to this person that I can never get back, and in a first experience I can never get back, and it really sent me down a bad path of feeling worthless. All my value was gone.
Hmm.
And just wondering who will want me now. I'm that broken rose already. Within a couple months, I met somebody else. I was introduced to a friend of a friend, and we very quickly went all the way. And it was a terrible experience in the sense of he was very forceful. He consent did not matter to this guy, but as soon as that was fully taken, it was like I was stuck. Like I can't go anywhere. The morning after losing my, I guess, official virginity, as they would say, um, we went to a breakfast place, which I will never go to again, probably. We sat down and he took my hand and he took my purity ring off my finger and put it on his hand because he had taken my purity. So
Sounds a bit like a psychopath.
a little bit, a little bit. And it was a very abusive situation.
Hmm.
By the time I got out of that, I was already feeling pretty worthless before. By the time I started actually having sex, my parents didn't want me talking to my siblings because I was a bad influence. Other family members were pulling very far away from me, even friends pulling very far away from me because, you know, to be engaging with sex before marriage, you're inviting demons into your life. And then if we associate with you, then we're going to be affected by that. So basically, I'm in this abusive relationship. This guy is literally raping me, and I have nobody. I have nobody I can confide in about this. I have no one telling me, like you should probably leave him and get as far away as you can. And also, honey, you still have all your worth.
Hmm.
Like there's no one to say that to me. A woman in church that I tried to confide in about what was going on, she straight up told me, she was like, listen, as soon as you have a man turned on, there's no stopping him. So you need to just make sure you don't turn him on unless you are ready to go all the way. Like that's the advice.
That's
um,
pretty terrible advice. I'm just
yeah,
curious. Did that end up being in a criminal situation?
it was not. No,
Okay.
no. And the only reason that we ended up breaking up, he broke up with me. He chose to be with somebody else. Honestly, best thing that ever happened. But that was very, very bad for me, and it left me in a very bad place mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of it.
Hmm.
And things went pretty downhill after that for a while.
I'd imagine that's horrible. I mean, the idea that you already know from your theology and your doctrine that you are, broken and worthless. The Bible clearly says all your righteousness is like a filthy rag. There's no
Yep.
one who does good, not even one. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. So you're bad. It's like this. It's not just the externals, but it's like North Korea. They can see everything. They're watching, and you one little step. God even can see inside your thoughts. So God's
Yeah.
constantly judging you for what you're doing and failing to do.
And
And
that's before you lose your virginity.
before the
That's
second, yeah.
before all that.
So
That's
now you're
before all
like
that. So it's even worse.
layers and layers.
Yeah, exactly.
And it does bring up though the clear message that they like the way you could twist it in the way they do is can you not see, Tim or Erica or whoever's listening, can you not see that without doing it God's way, it all falls apart? And then we bring in, of course, well, here's the answer. The answer is the gospel. You need
Hmm.
the gospel to redeem you. Jesus' death and resurrection is what makes you clean, gives you hope, it gives you, certainly wisdom. But they paint this picture of these choices are one path, and then God's path is the other. And the problem, I mean, there's a lot of problems, but they don't tell you, number one, that the path are encouraging is mythology, and we'll get into that later. It's deeply mythology, very, very clearly mythology. But they're also implying that, like you said, you're this rose that has been tainted, and you're so bad. Who's going to
Yeah.
want you? And that really mirrors the thing with God, where God is like, he talks with Israel about how I saw you. You were this baby in the field, this bloody, baby, and I clothed you and clothed your nakedness, and I took care of you. Like you were nothing without me, and you're
Hmm.
nothing. You're still nothing without me. Like if you walk away from me, you're nothing. And when you look at the way that it's described, it's very, very similar to like the way that a really abusive psycho would treat you. Like, I'm going to beat the
Yeah.
tarnation out of you, and no one else would love you, but I'll take you. I'm here. But trust me, if you
I'm
walk
doing
away,
you a favor.
yeah, I'm doing you a favor. If you walk away, this turns bad, and no one else is going to love you. Even though you think I'm bad, everything else is worse because I'm basically your redeemer. And you get trapped in that brainwashing deep enough, and
Yeah.
you probably, not you, but just people literally feel like, wow, I really am a really worthless person, and you're
Yeah.
broken. And that's where, of course, the church comes along and says, you're this needy, broken person. And they just swoop right in your vulnerability, and they prey on you. And you're like, yes, I
Yeah.
needed God and the gospel all this time. I desperately needed, a blood magic death cult focused on human
Yep.
sacrifice. you know,
Yep.
like I needed this to, you're like, where do you even go with it? It's so twisted. Anyway, I
But
just,
they keep you broken too. Like
yes,
they pull you in and they offer you the answer and the hope, but they also keep you in a place that you stay broken. There's no
yes.
healing. But the fact that you're not healing is of course on you because clearly there's something wrong with you. You're not doing the level because God's there to give it to you. So it's on you.
Yeah. And they mix it in too with this idea of the love being always bad, like it's carnal. Like I remember a lot of messages when I was growing up of you, if you saw someone, say teenagers or young adults, who you heard all their, they were being having some kind of illicit relationship, you would have said, at least about the guy for sure, he clearly doesn't love her. Like there's no way
Yep.
for two people to be intimate and to be loving each other that way for it to be true. It has to be only, worldly, carnal, erotic love. There's no way that this can be, agape love from God. You can't truly love someone, because if you love them, you would just hands off and, pursue their purity.
Yep.
And it creates a whole situation where the only, like everything about you that's just driven to be intimate and to enjoy that part of life is just, it's no, no, no. And I always felt like when I was growing up, as I got to really starting to think through these issues, like, wouldn't it be better to start with like the celebration message, like celebrate how you're made first? I mean, clearly, if we think God made this, then it's His idea. It's a great idea. He gave us this body. He gave us the way it works. He gave us the brain that's obviously very erotic. Why don't we say celebrate it, thank God for this, and then say, but by the way, just be careful. Instead, it's like everything is like, be careful. It's bad, 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 bad. And then they kind of tack on, and by the way, it's good in marriage. God designed it. But you can't say it's bad 1,000 times and then add on like two little, oh, but it's good at the end and hope it
Yeah.
works out okay. It doesn't work out okay.
No. And to the world I came in, and I know this is a more extreme, but there are a lot of people out there that grow up in this a lot more than you think. Masturbation, absolutely not.
Hmm.
Absolutely not. Um, and so it's like you not only do you not know your own body, you're not allowed to own your own body, because even you doing anything with yourself is a betrayal to your future spouse.
Yeah.
Like, your body is entirely that person's.
Yeah.
So
And
you
for sure
have
you're,
no control over like your own pleasure, your own sexuality, anything.
yeah, and for sure it's a violation of someone else when you're thinking about other people.
Mhm.
With that whole setup, one of the talking about the purity ring here.
Yeah.
I heard someone recently describe the idea of a reclaiming your virginity thing. Did you ever go through that where it was of someone who literally had to go through a mock wedding, like a literal mock wedding in a real church? Did you ever hear anything about that in your circles?
I've definitely heard about that. I considered trying to do something like that. Now, I haven't heard of it being a specific like wedding or something, but I remember trying to figure out after that relationship with my the man who had taken my virginity. After that relationship, I was kind of encouraged by a lot of people to be like, you can reclaim your virginity. You can make a new promise, and considered it, but that it just, I think the fact that I had been so disowned by family and friends, that I was like an outsider, even when I tried to go to church,
Hmm.
kind of made it so that that wouldn't have been reasonable anyway.
Yeah.
Um, I think if I had been more accepted and embraced and felt more welcome in those circles, I probably would have done something like that for
Yeah.
sure.
That's a really good point about how often the people that you'd think would love you back to Jesus, so to speak, they often are the ones with
Hmm.
the biggest.
They're pushing you away,
Yeah.
pushing you
It's
further into it.
Yeah, and it's probably something that we could say even about a lot of other sins or bad choices like atheism. Almost nobody um, has reached out to me in my Christian world. They're just like, you're a traitor now. We're done with you. And so it's
Yeah.
like, well, wait a second. If you really believe the gospel, don't you think you should be preaching to me? Not that I'd care if they did, obviously, but if you really believe it, that I'm about to burn in the flames of hell, what
Hmm.
am I apparently not worth even talking to? And
Hmm.
that's maybe a good segue to take us back to some of the earlier beliefs here. And I want to make sure we carve out time later for what changed, but just getting a baseline for what you did believe. Were you taught in a literal hell that was waiting for you if you didn't believe in Jesus?
Oh, yes. There were many conversations about describing how terrible hell is. Like, basically, think of like you're on fire, but like squeeze that all into like one location and then spread it all over you. It's like this, the worst thing you can imagine times like a million, and it never stops no matter what you do.
Hmm.
Um, like basically as extreme as you can go, but like understand that it's even worse than that. And you know, I didn't hear the term religious trauma until like probably the last like year. People don't talk about that. It's a very real thing, and it happens, I think, especially to children who are raised with that literal belief of hell. I think it's hard. I think I'm finding it's hard for a lot of people to actually grasp the idea of a literal hell. And so I think that what you were saying about people not reaching out to you, because I've thought about the same thing of, I only ever get reached out to if it's like for a scolding or something. It's not like I love you or whatever. I've gotten a couple of those, but it's very, very rare. Um, and I think it just goes to show how, and this is just my personal opinion, um, it goes to show how there's no way these people believe in an actual literal hell. Because, see, for me, I believed in an actual literal hell. And I would hear all those stories about, if you're in the grocery store and you look at somebody and you get this feeling you need to approach that person because you might be their only chance of getting away from hell. You don't know.
Hmm.
And so
Like their blood
it
is on your hands if you don't do something.
absolutely, absolutely, which is a lot of responsibility, um, and pretty messed up. And
Yeah.
then you wonder why you have these people that are like so passionate in the middle of stores going, please listen to me. And it's like, they were probably raised under that. And they're honestly, you know, they're a little out there, but they're honestly terrified for you. And that's their trauma coming out.
Yeah. And also, that's a good point too of the reality that for people in that, and I was certainly one of them, there's really nothing else that's worth talking about. Like people would, you would open up doors to talk about, like if you and I just met or something and bumped into each other in the mall, and something, the context is where we start being chatty. You might say something like, "Yeah, what do you think about the Super Bowl?" or "What do you think about this?" And, "Oh, it's weather." But it's whatever it is, and even if it's like friendships, we're like, "Oh, what books are you reading? What movies are you watching? Where'd you go for your latest vacation?" Whatever context it is, that's all fluff to get back to one issue. Where are
Yep.
you with God?
Yeah.
Is Jesus' death and resurrection covering your sin? Is his unrighteousness your propitiation? And if it's not, then what does the Super Bowl matter if you're going to burn in hell? What does
Yep.
it matter if you went to a nice park if you're about to burn in hell? Or and even like if you're a good person, like if you die as a prostitute or a policeman, if you don't believe in Jesus, you both end up in the same place. So you're not upstanding just because you're upstanding in society.
Yeah.
You are a bad person if you don't have Christ covering you. And so there's my point in saying this was just there's no way to just look at someone and say, I have no ulterior motive. I have no agenda in this conversation. I'd just love to get to know you. What do you believe? What do you think about life? What's your family like? What's your favorite holiday? What books you're reading? It's always like, tell me what you need to tell me so I can find a way to get
A
in here and
loophole.
say,
Yeah.
and especially the hope is, of course, I hope you're going to tell me something like you're really struggling, you don't have peace,
Mhm.
things aren't going so well, or you're really questioning your worldview or something. You're like, oh, pounce,
I
gospel,
could
gospel,
tell you
gospel.
where to find that.
Yes, chapter and verse. Well, speaking of gospel, I've kind of danced around this a couple times, but for anyone that doesn't know, what is the actual way to uh, and I'm saying this as what you used to believe, but what is the way that they would have taught you to have a relationship with God? We know from what we said so far that you would believe there's a sin issue, a really big sin issue with what
Mhm.
we personally do, our sins of what we do and what we fail to do for God. We also know we inherit the Adamic nature, so we're judicially already condemned by the time we even get started. You're dead in your
Mhm.
trespasses and sins. So what
Yep.
what is what is the good side of that? If there's bad news and good news, what is the good news?
So the way to get to heaven, and of course, depending on which denomination you're in, and so I got some different ones. Um, Praying, being sincere, repenting of your sins, and giving yourself to God. It's supposed to be that simple, which is other thought why it would confuse me so much when it's like, well, now I have to focus on all these other things. But then if you get too comfortable with all these other things, well, maybe when you ask God into your heart, maybe you actually didn't accept him into your heart. Maybe you're not really a Christian. Um,
So
so
did you do it
making
again?
sure, staying in touch with it. Oh, so many times, so many times. I don't remember the first time I did it. I am sure I was very, very young. But throughout my childhood, throughout my teens, throughout my adulthood, I asked God into my heart so many times. I recommitted myself so many times. I was baptized twice, once as an infant, once as an adult, because I
Hmm.
felt like this is my decision now. I need to do this. Um, I any opportunity to go up to the altar and pray, and of course, that's when I was a Baptist, not a Presbyterian. Presbyterians stay in their seats, um,
Yeah,
but
the chosen
any
frozen, or the frozen chosen, I think.
yes, yes, exactly. Oh, I saw this meme where it basically was like a Presbyterian when they're really feeling it and into the sermon, and someone just sitting there. And then it's like oh, what's the other one? the ones that dance around and stuff and get really excited.
Charismatics or Pentecostals?
Yeah, Pentecostal when they are not enjoying it. Same person just sitting there stone faced, like it's
That's
the
funny.
two opposites.
It's true. It's very true.
It's true.
But the whole idea of what you said, I want to clarify for anyone that isn't familiar with
Yes.
the word repent, and I know most people probably would be, but just for other people from other religions that might watch, the way Christians use the word repent, it's a technical term that refers to change your mind about basically sin and about who's in charge. So it's like saying, I am, if you could imagine it like what you're grasping, you're like, I am grasping my own selfishness, my sin, my worldly pleasures. I'm focused on me, self, sin. And repentance is saying, I'm going to let go. I'm going to open my hands up. I'm going to turn away from my sin and from myself. And I'm going to open myself up to what God has to provide. And what he provides he provides the righteousness of Christ. You say, my
Right.
righteousness is nothing. It's a debt I can never repay. And then he is going to pay your debt, bring you back to zero, and then give you riches upon riches, the righteousness of Christ applied to you. And that's both judicially, where he's saying if you are in Christ, if meaning you believe that his death and resurrection is for you and covers you, and you've accepted that free gift, then you are declared righteous. But the idea is that someday that's not just going to be a declaration, that's going to be your experience. You're going to get to heaven and he's going to make you like Christ. You're going to be
Yeah.
you're not going to fight sin. You're going to never even be tempted. You're going to want righteousness for real, not because you're disciplined or you're in the word or praying a lot or you have an accountability partner. It's because you just want it.
Yeah.
It's the word goes from being just written in the book to written in your heart. You want to honor God. And that's the message. And it's amazing though what you're saying about people having to do it over and over. It creates a dynamic too of what I would have called before a mountaintop experience, where you want so much to be on fire. And I mean, not every person I've interviewed would have said this way, but a lot of people would have said, like, I want to be on fire. I don't want to be a casual Christian. I'm not in this halfway. I'm not in this
I
for
just
cultural
realized
reasons.
the irony in that. I
Yeah,
want to be on fire,
for
but
God.
not in hell. I want to be on fire for God. I just
Yeah,
realized the irony in that. But yes,
it is very
absolutely.
ironic. Go ahead.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree with you. Being on fire for God, that is exactly how it would be described. It's like you want to be like burning with a passion, um, just in the world,
Yeah.
living for Him. If people look at you, they see Him. The You're in worship, you're feeling it, and you're like, I need this like all the time. I need this level of passion all the time, for
Yeah.
sure.
And would you say that you would have looked down on people that weren't on fire for God at that earlier stage? Where
I
it's like they're
wouldn't
they're showing
say
up, but I don't know the last time they shared the gospel with somebody. They probably don't read their
I
Bible that
wasn't
much.
I wasn't normally kind of that. I would more look at people, and this is gonna sound horrible, but this is the honest truth. I would look at people who aren't in the church with like pity, with fear.
Hmm.
Like I want to love them. I want them to know like this, and so I would be honestly like scared for people, but honestly also pity them. But normally it was people that were like not in church or not self-proclaimed Christians or whatever. I wasn't normally There were very few times I was actually looking around at the people at church going, I'm not sure you really believe it. I would just look around and go, we're supposed to be here for God. Why are we arguing over this thing
Yeah.
when there's so many other things that matter? Like I would get mad at the people in church for the fact that they weren't caring more for the other people, not necessarily how much they believed, but their level of care for other people. When I was a young adult, I knew a woman who was a lesbian, and I had a conversation with her one day and basically kind of picked her brain and found out she never heard the story of Jesus. She knew about like religion, she knew about Christianity. She knew Christians hated her and thought she was going to hell, but she had like never been told about, hey, there's an option here. That like if you repent, if you choose God, like you can be saved from this. And of course, I don't believe that now, but the level of this person I knew who lives in the United States, lives in my own town, and hasn't even been told this. And yet we're looking at this person like she's a lesbian, so she's lost cause, all that.
Hmm. It's amazing the hurt we've caused some of those
Yeah.
communities. It's awful. A couple more questions, and I want to give you a chance to take us over to the next part of the story. But just again, for understanding where you're coming from, with the fear issue of hell and all that, one of the things that gets mixed up in a lot of this for some denominations is the idea that Christ is coming back at any minute, and that if you're not on the
Mhm.
right side of the fence, you're going to be left behind, either in just in the fearful sense of that, like you just don't be left behind, and maybe the additional point of you're going to go through the tribulation, which is going to be horrible. You're going to wish you were dead. Like, why go through it? Did you have any of that kind of teaching, or was it more like I mean, Presbyterians are obviously not into that side of things as much. Like, what was it like for you thinking about
Oh, they
Christ's
are.
return?
They are, but also I learned more from my parents who are just extreme anyways. No, you have to be on your toes always, constantly, because he could come
Mm,
back anytime. As a child, that translates to, what if I'm in the bathroom and he comes back? Like, you never know. It could be any time at all. And that adds to that level of fear of, have I done everything I need to do? Is my heart right? Like, I know I asked him into my heart like a bunch of times, but is it right now? I
mm,
was in a church at one point where the pastor would say, if you're in a car accident and you cuss, you're going to hell. Like, it
mm,
doesn't matter if you were like, right, the moment you die, if you die while saying a cuss word, you're going to hell. Like
mm.
that level.
Well, that sounds more Catholic almost. The Catholic. I've interviewed a few Catholic people in the last few months, and they're like you literally, like, if you do something at the last minute, that can
Mm-hmm.
condemn you no matter what you were doing before. Like, you have to
Yep.
make sure that's why it's very fearful to go through any kind of long period of time where you're not in confession, because you got to
Yeah.
keep the slate clean. It
Well,
it
I went to a lot of different churches. And so I did have a lot of different experiences, different levels of this, that, and whatever. But then also my parents were just, I mean, my dad to this day, so the extreme levels, he says that the church itself is, basically a problem and not right. And they don't know the true God. He's like that level. He's like above all
mm.
the religions. He's the only one that knows the truth.
So it's like, of all the religious people and maybe non-religious people on the planet, there's a subset called Christianity, and if you slice out the versions of Christianity that you don't agree with right up front, like maybe Catholicism or Mormonism or whatever, there's like a small subset of Christianity, and if you could zoom in on that, of the people that you would say, yeah, we're probably this group is probably really close to having the true gospel, that there's still in that subset a very small set of people that are actually honoring God, that the rest are falling away, whether it's through feminism or lack of belief in inerrancy or maybe evolution. That just the actual people, and of course that's biblical because it does say that the path to life is very narrow and few make it.
Yep.
The path to destruction is very wide, and it does lead to a huge arrogance issue. And everybody thinks, oh, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right.
Yep.
It's amazing when you think about that. Now, are they still in that today?
Very much so. I will say a verse that scared me a lot when I was a kid was one, and I don't remember where it is, but a verse that says, even some who thought they believed didn't really believe and will go to hell.
Yeah.
That was like terrifying to me that I was that person. Um, my mother is still in my parents are divorced at this point. My mother is still she's still in the church. She's still doing the whole thing. Not quite as extreme as she used to be while not being with my dad, but still definitely big on the purity culture, big on the all of those things are still important. My
Mm.
father lives somewhere in Tennessee by himself in a very small, I think he's basically in a garage essentially, off of someone else's place. And he's posting things online every day. He sends us emails every single day breaking down, like, I miss my family, I want to see us back together, like some of my children are falling away from God, this is like terrible, like quoting verses talking about how horrible, like he calls out pastors that we used to be under and stuff, and this is what this person's doing wrong and all this stuff, and no one will talk to me and everything because you're afraid, and like we've all tried to talk to you, it didn't work. So he's still very much that level. cult leader mentality for sure.
Sounds
Growing
like it.
up, he very much growing up, he had this idea of he was going to buy a house on this massive piece of land. And then as us children grew, he would basically build us our own homes on the land and we would all live together.
Wow. But that that
He really wants to be a cult leader.
that background, it does, as much as some people might want to say, well, that's extreme, whatever, but it does breed that. I mean, because you're talking about a belief system that says very clearly that there will be people that have, preachers that have a desire to teach falsehood, that they want to go where the itching ears are. There's a
Yep.
lot of people that fall away. First and Second Timothy and Titus talks about that. There's preachers that you do have to call out and say, you're a false
Yep.
prophet, you're a false prophet. But then on top of that, you have this idea that, like, the conspiracy theory kind of mentality, where you do expect the end times, you do expect the mark of the beast coming. So you're kind of
Yep.
afraid of politics. You're afraid of the evolutionists, certainly, with the, horror of horrors, that you might be a common descent, have a common descent with animals, and
Absolutely.
that the Earth might be super old. I'm just making an assumption there, but these horrible scientists that are teaching such crazy ideas to your kids, if they get to the secular universities,
Hmm.
everybody's basically opposed to you, and it's very secretive. And of course, some people get into this weird, really weird stuff, secret societies and stuff. But it just, even if you didn't go that extreme, like, that this world is trying desperately to ignore and push out God, or directly fight him, to to say he's irrelevant, to say God is dead, or just directly to give God the finger, say we're not going to bow our knee to Jesus and the Bible, the Word of God. And you can see how these kind of things can happen easily, because
Hmm.
it feels like I have one really clear path to live my life the very best way, and that is in total obedience and submission to the Word of God, and to
Yeah.
the God that I'm talking to. And when you add to it, to this mixture of God, I'm not sure if you, I'd love to hear if you had this too, but God's speaking to me. If you add to it, like, God's telling me this, he's telling me that, then you can take it all kinds of directions then, because now you actually have a direct line with God.
You're supposed to, and that was something that I always struggled with, was the
Mm.
fact that God's supposed to be able to talk directly to you. Well, I was mindful enough to know that when I hear something talking to me, it's my own consciousness. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so how do I know what of this is God talking to me and what of this is just me? Or what if it's the devil trying to make me think that's God? Or, and so you deal with that back and forth of, but it's supposed to be. You're supposed to have that direct link with God because we're not Catholic. We don't have to go to the priest for that. We can just go straight to God, you
Yeah.
know?
Did you ever struggle with the whole issue of, like, God's will and his peace, like where he's saying, date this guy versus this guy, or whatever, not date, but be chaperone with this guy versus that guy, by
Be
by
committed
this,
to. Marry this one or that one.
yeah, or even little stuff like, buy the blue dress or the red dress. Like, did you struggle with God's leadership and him opening doors, and this sense of, like, if you ever wrong, like, wow, I had peace with God, and then I did it and it blew up in my face. Did you ever kind of struggle with any of those kind of issues?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I always so sincerely wanted to know, what is God's will for my life? What does he want me to do? How am I going to live my life in a way that not only glorifies him, but brings people to him and lets them know? Um, and his will is like so important. You got to figure out his will. Well, how do you figure out his will? You pray, you think on it, you listen, and like you said, the opening of doors. Well, if a door opens, that must mean something. Then it closes in your face. I must have done something wrong. I must have misunderstood. I must have misheard, like something. It led to so many different struggles for me because I took that so seriously and I tried so hard, and so my life was very unstable and stuff. And so I took that as, well, I'm doing something wrong or something like that. It is
Mm.
definitely a struggle.
Yeah, amazing. With the science thing, I'll keep this one real short. Did you all, I assume, believe in a young Earth?
Absolutely. That's part of where the homeschooling came in because, we don't want to hear about evolution. Basically all I heard about evolution was, well, some people believe there was a massive explosion and the world just appeared. That's just so silly. Clearly, a being in the sky just spoke it into existence in 6 days. if the being in the sky can speak it into the existence, why did it take 6 days? That's my question, but I digress.
Yeah.
No, we did believe in a young Earth, and science. Bad. We don't learn about science. We don't. They didn't even like doctors.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, I feel like I've got a good background for a lot of it, but maybe a last question, and then move us to the current day. Um, what was your actual salvation experience like? Was there an altar call, or were you praying with someone, or just by yourself? Like, when did you place your faith in Christ, and maybe just tell us a little bit about what life was like. I'm baiting this in the sense of the good stuff. Like, what was it like to be a happy Christian? Were there happy parts, and what was that like? And then maybe take us into after that, we'll go into the rest of your story.
So kind of what I had already said of like asking many times there. I don't remember the first time.
Okay.
I remember asking many times over my life, going back to the altar many times in my life.
So looking back, you wouldn't
I
say there was one time that, when you were a Christian, you wouldn't have said, I got saved at age 8 or something?
No, and that was something that really scared me, was that I didn't remember that one time,
Yeah.
because I'd done it so many times and none of them had led to this crazy change like some people say it does. So I'm like what's wrong with all these times? So I didn't have that one specific time. It was a lot of times. It was a lot of asking. It was a lot of reaffirmations. It was a lot of recommitting. Um, I I a big part for me was I was in the worship band for a few years, and that was like a huge thing for me. I had always loved singing and always wanted to learn to play the guitar. I'm okay on the guitar. I play the guitar so that I can sing, basically. And so for a couple of years, I was in the worship band, and that was like huge for me. It was like,
So you enjoyed
my
that?
dream. I loved it so much, but at the same time, it was also horrible. Because something that I found, the more and more you get closer into the church leadership and get to actually see, like, you expect these church leaders to be these holy people who are good and stuff. And then you see all the drama, all the chaos, all the way you see people being used. You're being used. When I was in the church band, I was a single mom. I was having a really hard time. I could barely, get through my own life. I had a lot of mental health stuff going on. But I would commit my Sundays and my Tuesdays and my Wednesdays to the church and to the band and stuff. And I was getting nothing for it, but I'm doing that for God. So like, it's important. So the singing part, I loved getting the opportunity to sing. Everything else, it was horrible. I felt like the leadership, the men are the leaders and stuff oftentimes. And this wasn't a church where they didn't mind women being leaders and stuff, but still, there's still that thing. And I kind of got somewhere in the band where I felt like I was getting more responsibility and opportunity, and it was taken away from me with like no communication. But then I would struggle with the fact that, like, well, I'm just supposed to be there to worship God. It's not about me. So then me being upset over this means there's something wrong with me, because it's not about me, it's about God. Well, I really want the spotlight. I've always wanted the spotlight. Like, from when I was a child, like, I wanted to be an actress, and I wanted to be a famous writer, and I wanted to do all these things. People know my name. And so it was like, that was the closest that I kind of felt like I had gotten, was being able to be in the church band, but then I couldn't make it about me. So that was, as you can tell, a back and forth struggle for me, for sure.
Yeah. I'm just curious, before we move on from the worship part of it, did you
Yeah.
ever feel like, either for yourself, or just people you could imagine that were listening, that it could be manipulative, in the sense of, and maybe frame it more when you were more of the recipient, but just listening to the way that they set the service up, some of the words, they talk a lot about, in my words here, these aren't actual songs, but just the sense of, like, you're broken, you're doing it your way, or things aren't going very well, but it's number one, it's going to be okay, kind of like this,
Mhm.
peace. God's going to give you peace. He's going to restore the years the locusts have eaten. He's going to take care of you. He's going to make this all beautiful. Like in His time, God makes all things beautiful. So basically, it's almost like you, in my experience, there's like this inducement of an aura of like, open your hands, open your mind, and let God work. For goodness sake, like you said, get yourself off of you, get yourself off of
Mhm.
yourself and off of your own personal needs and desires, and open yourself up for God to do something amazing. The only thing, it's almost like you said before, it's if there's an issue, it's not God, it's you. So open yourself
Yep.
up to let God do what He's been wanting to do all this time. The only reason you aren't happy, joyful, peaceful, thriving is because of your sin nature and something that you're holding on to. If you will just open your hands, open your heart, open your mind to the Lord who loves you, He's been right there all this time. You feel like you're far away from Him, and you walked away, but He's been chasing you down in the most
Yep.
loving way possible. If you just turn around, you'll find He's not a million miles away like you might feel. He's right beside
Right there
you.
behind you.
And if you open yourself up, He will start the healing process immediately, and He will make you whole. He will, as the Bible says, after you've suffered for a while, He will establish and strengthen and settle you. And you get people that are needy, where like you've talked about, broken relationships, marriage issues, medical issues, I should say, any kind of money, job loss issues. Your kids aren't, your grown kids aren't obedient or whatever. They're being worldly. All these things, and you're just like, I am so broken. I just want God. I want God to do something amazing. Like it's like almost like you're saying, God, will you please break into this? Like shine forth your glory, make a difference here. And you get someone that's that needy, that broken, where if they were in a private conversation with a deep friend, they might even start crying because they're so needy. You get the music playing, all this stuff, the words, lower the lights, and it's like a little counseling session. Like, hey, God is here to personally minister to you. Let's do it. Did it feel like that to you? And I'm asking it more like in the manipulative sense.
So I didn't understand the manipulation part of it until I was out of it, because I was exactly the person you've described, of always coming in needy and broken and needing stuff, and just the right thing has me in tears, and like that was 1,000% me. So for me, I didn't realize the manipulation of that until I was out of it, and seeing people talking about it and realizing, oh, so basically, you've put me in this position where I'm constantly not only talking about, but singing about how broken and horrible I am. It's a no wonder I like feel like I am now, and feel like I have this need and stuff. It does put you in that place. But when I was actually in it, I absolutely did not understand the manipulation of it at all.
Hmm.
No.
It's amazing. And aside manipulation, this is a very much a side note to the music issue, but it often too, when I think about manipulation, it reminds me of what we do to kids, because a lot of this does boil down to childhood indoctrination, which I would also
Yep.
call psychological child abuse. But when it's not as much the word manipulation, but the word preying, like prey, praying. You get
Hmm.
a kid that is naturally um, wanting to feel the pain of other people. Like if you have two kids and one of them falls on their bike, the other kid, whether they're Christian or not, if they're friends, they're going to run them. Oh, I'm so sorry you scraped your knee and you're bleeding. Let me go get your parents, whatever. Let me help you up. Kids just love to help, and they hate seeing other people in pain. And so
Yep.
you see the pain of all pains, this icon, this picture or statue or whatever, or verbal description of Jesus on the cross, where like, this man has a crown of thorns and nail prints, and he's been scourged, and his skin's been ripped open from the whip and so forth, and he's got a spear in his side. And you tell a kid, hey, Johnny, that that story that we're telling you, that picture you can see, or the picture in your Bible, he did that because of you. You are the problem. And if you were the only human that had ever lived, if you had been Adam or you'd been Eve, and you alone had sinned, and then the human race had stopped for some reason, Jesus would have had to do this, and He would have done it just for you. You are that
Yep.
bad. And just the way that these contexts keep on preying and manipulating on people, it really is shocking to me. It's almost like a psychological case study as to how
Yeah.
to brainwash people, especially when you do it when they're really, really young. Anyway, it's
Yep.
just a side note, but I can't help but thinking about
That
that
was
one.
exactly my experience. So yes, you're spot on.
Well, we haven't gotten yet to the point where things changed. So I'd love to hear what were the early seeds of what actually turned this to a different, very different story for you.
Um, that's always a tough question for me because there's so many pieces and so many parts. I mean, I remember having questions as a kid, asking those questions, being made to feel stupid or bad for having those questions and kind of bearing them down, and just trying so hard to, like, get rid of that doubt and wholeheartedly believe. Um, I finally actually, through my 20s, was kind of in and out of church. I would kind of commit and get back into it, and then I would go back out and then feel broken again and go back in. Um,
Hmm.
when I was in the church band, that was probably between 2015, 16, maybe going into 2017 a little bit. And that was actually the last church that I went to. When things you bring these issues up, and the of concerns about this, looking at people around you, wondering if we're supposed to be Christians, why do we have this perspective? Why are we acting like this? Why aren't we more passionate about taking care of the homeless people around us, this, that, whatever? Um, you have all these questions, and then what you're told is, well, I want you to just think about yourself and your own issues and your own personal relationship, and then all of those will go away. And I would try that. It gets to a point where it builds, and at some point you can't ignore it anymore.
Hmm.
So I me leaving the church was kind of a sort of slow fade. Casting Crown song, slow fade. um, I would go less and less. I stopped showing up to the church band, and would kind of show up every now and then. You know, every now and then someone comes to you and is like, "Oh, I miss you. We want to see you again." But like we've already talked before, it's pretty shocking how I was a quarter of a mile away from the church, and I'd never hear from anybody.
Hmm.
I was right there. Um,
There's the love of Jesus.
yeah, exactly. Which, I mean, I'm grateful for the lack of harassment. At the same time, it's like you're not even reaching out or checking in, and then when you
Hmm.
run into church people outside of church, they get really uncomfortable and like don't know what to do. It's like, what is this?
It's like an effective
Um,
shunning almost.
Yeah, very much,
Hmm.
very much. I remember the next to last time I ever went to church. Um, I went in once the service had started. I literally was in like a crying, like panic attack state the entire service, and then as soon as they went to the last song, I ran out.
Hmm.
Um,
What was the panic
and
attack over? Like over whether or not it was real, or was it something different?
I think it was more just the by this point the trauma was showing itself,
Hmm.
and I didn't understand that at the time. I didn't know what it was, but it was just like, just to be in that environment after having like a little bit of release, it was way too much. And then of course there's the fear, the anxiety. At this point I still wholeheartedly believe in God, believe in hell, believe in all these things. um,
Hmm.
so it was bad. It was very scary, and very bad for your mental health. I did go one more time after that. It was for an Easter service, and I went with my husband and my child. And for me, I saw that time as like almost a farewell. Like at this point, I knew I wasn't coming back. And by this point, I had gotten past enough of that initial emotional trauma from it to be able to just go in there, hi, how you doing, shake everybody's hand, and walk out. And it was like just
Hmm.
being done and free of it. Um,
By the way,
I
that's a great
tried,
idea. I've never heard anyone say it, but that's a great idea. It's like you're having a
I
funeral
did,
service in your head.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
really
for
interesting.
sure. And I didn't even see it entirely that way at the time. Part of me did. But as I get further past that, I realized what a monumental moment that was for me.
Hmm.
I tried doing the sort of spirituality thing. I tried kind of being a Christian but not in church. Like, well, what if I just focus on the relationship part of it, like me and God? Um, I tried all the different things, and they weren't like really sticking. And I started finding communities online that of people who were basically going through the same thing, and we were able to talk about these things together and stuff, because there wasn't really anything I could talk about like in my personal life about what was going on. um, Not honestly, because the questions and the wonderings and all that, that's just so bad and so dangerous. So you've either got the people around you who are like, well, are going to shut down your questions, or the people that just aren't even going to get it. um, and so to find online communities of people who like relate and stuff, it's like, wow, there are people who have been through this and are thinking the same things I am, feeling the same things I am. um,
Hmm.
and we were able to sort of talk through these things together. um,
That's so cool.
it took me a while to finally get to, I guess, that atheist point, because even once I had kind of really gone through a lot of deconversion and kind of breaking down my beliefs and stuff, atheist is, it's a very scary term when you come from religion, because it's like I always wanted to have like the door open just a little bit, just in case. You
Yeah.
know, I tried to be like, okay, so not sure I necessarily believe. I'm having a really hard time with this. God's not really answering me. It's kind of a problem, but just in case, like, I don't want to say I don't believe, because once you say you don't believe, you've separated yourself from God, and He separates Himself from you. And what if, on that off chance, it is true? And so you keep that door like slightly open, and it finally got to a point. I mean, it's a scary thing. You basically, I actually wrote something recently um, where I kind of talked about, it's basically a story of like showing up in eternity, and you see God throwing people into hell, and you kind of argue with Him about, like, well, what about this person? Like, what about these good things that they did? And, he, that abusive person of, well, they didn't do for me, and they didn't love me, or whatever, throw them into hell. And at the end of it, I just turn and like jump into the flames. And that's literally what it feels like, is like,
Hmm.
in order to get to that point of fully deconverting, you have to basically, what it honestly feels like, is open the gates of hell and face the reality of, like, if I'm wrong and this is real, then me considering these things, me talking about these things, is opening this door to a possible eternal punishment that I can never escape. It's terrifying. So I
Hmm.
really tried to avoid that. Eventually, it got to that point, and now it doesn't scare me anymore. I'll have these moments where uh, there's certain things I won't say, like blatant mocks to certain ideas and stuff, because there's still like that scolded child inside me that's like, oh, don't do that, like you might get punished, you might this, that, whatever. um but it's not because I actually think hell is real. Now I'm to that point where I think about it, and I look at the religious people, and I kind of want to look at them and say, so you honestly believe, like, if you believe in the evangelical hell, you're basically saying that you think that someone will burn and torture for eternity by a God who made the person just like that. Like, why not just end their life? Like, you make something, you don't like it, you throw it out. Why is it that you make something, this idea that you make something, it's exactly how you made it, and you're so mad at it for being exactly how you made it, that instead of just throwing it out, you're going to torture it forever.
Hmm.
Like, and then you start thinking about, like, actually think about that idea forever. You know, I've lived 30 years now. Feels like a long time. That compared to eternity, never escaping. Like that's what you're saying. Is that what you're saying? That's what you're saying. And it's a lot better now being able to look at that, and instead of thinking, oh, like that's forever and like this terrifying thing, if I could be there, be able to look at that and be like, something created something and is so mad at it that it's going to torture it forever. Really? That's what we're going with? You know?
And it's amazing that the people who we're talking about that would espouse that would at the same time say wholeheartedly, God is a God of love,
Mm-hmm.
immense love, overwhelming love that just is beyond our comprehension. And yet
Yeah.
I think especially when you add in the Calvinism stuff we talked about earlier, you're thinking, okay, God made this universe knowing that he was going to, on planet Earth, he was going to make a whole bunch of people. And yet he knew that the path would be very narrow for those who would make it. So
Yeah.
he knowing that, whatever, 80-90% of the people, 95% of humans are going to just burn in hell, why would
Mm-hmm.
it be better to let them live and burn than to just not make them? And
Mm-hmm.
and why would you, like, even just getting into the mythology a little bit, like, why would you start it off by creating a Garden of Eden nursery, so to speak, for these children,
Mm-hmm.
Adam and Eve, and then let this enemy of their souls, the serpent, in? Like, what parent's going to let a king cobra into your nursery with your baby? And you're
Yep.
like, but he's a God of love. And it's like this whole concept of he loves you so, so much, but if you don't love him back, he's going to burn you. And
Mm-hmm.
I know Christians cannot wrap their minds around it. It's so hard to see, but that is very much a psycho God mentality. Your God loves you to
Absolutely.
the nth degree, but the minute you turn your back on him, he will beat you with a bat till your bones are shattered. Like, what
Yeah.
kind of psycho would do that to his kids? And
Yeah.
the idea that Christians can't see that, not just the idea that, yes, they can't see it, they can't call their God a psycho God, but the fact that they can't see it and won't even consider entertaining it is itself yet another part of the issue. It's not the issue of that exact idea. It's the fact that it when you're stuck in this stuff, it shuts your ability down to be skeptical and critical and to see it for what it is. And basically,
Yeah.
you have to bow your knee. You have to bow your knee. He is the king. He is the judge. Will not the judge of the earth do right? His ways are higher than ours. And it's the idea, like, when you get to heaven and you understand the white hot holiness of God, you won't question him anymore. You will just praise him, say, your holiness, like Job, woe is me. I put my hand over my mouth now. Now that I've seen the glory of
Mm-hmm.
God, I'm going to shut up now. I thought I had some good excuses, reasons to question you, God. Now that I see the true God and all your glory, now that I'm in a glorified state and can actually see you without being consumed, I see it now. I was completely wrong. I was so out of place to question you. You have that sucked into you from day one. Do not question the Lord of the earth. And you can't see him as a psycho. And it's exactly what a psychotic marriage partner would do to you. They would slowly
Absolutely.
groom you to the point where you're like, this is reality. The way that the psycho person sees it must be reality. And
Yeah.
if I try to question the narrative, it's just another proof that I'm the problem here. And it's like the ability to question the narrative and say, no, no, I like you almost have to, like, brace yourself for it. Like, I will give myself the freedom to say, for the first time in my life, I am now the judge. I will judge the Yahweh character, and I will judge him wholeheartedly. Genocide was wrong. If I know a lot of that stuff's made up, but if any part of the genocide that actually happened in, the Noah story and the Canaanite story, conquering Canaan, the land theft, the slavery, the misogyny, this, women, like you mentioned earlier at the beginning, women who get raped by somebody, and that woman has to become her uh,
Her rapist
her
husband.
yeah, the woman has to,
I
yes,
mean,
yes,
what? Yeah.
wife for the rapist, because he gave the daddy a few shekels of silver. All of these horrible things, like, you can say to yourself that, number one, it doesn't sound right. If you give at least yourself that freedom to start there, this doesn't sound right. But number
Yeah.
two, to say, I will take this wherever it goes. Meaning, if this is true, that's the Bible story, the gospel story, if this is true, then I will give myself the freedom to just question it, knowing that from an apologetics, defense of the gospel sense, I will just learn more and it will take me right back to God. But if I learn more and it takes me away from what I used to believe, as scary as it is to say it, That's okay. I want the truth more than I want my religion,
Yeah.
more than I want my parents or my church's approval. I want the truth. And
Yeah.
it sounds like from what you're saying, you were at that stage where you were willing to be honest with what you were seeing. And
Yeah.
that takes so
It's
much great
a
kudos to you for the bravery.
it's a very, very hard place to get to, and I give kudos to anyone who has gotten to that point and gotten through that point, because it is terrifying. It's pretty much one of the, if not the scariest thing you're going to go through, because like I said, it literally feels like opening those gates of hell and just walking right into it.
Yeah. And I love how you brought up Pascal's wager there too. Of like, if you're right that there's no God, then fine, your life's fine. But if you're wrong, you are very, very wrong. The
Yeah.
way the gamble here is too big. You need to side, on the err on the side of caution. If there's a
Yeah.
God, you better avoid his wrath. And it's
Yeah.
funny how that came into your equation too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not worth the risk. And you feel like, well, me believing this, it doesn't hurt anything, it doesn't harm anything. But yeah, it does. Because think about it. If you're wrong and that's not true, think of all the trauma you're putting on yourself, you're putting on your children, you're putting on the people around you, the fear that you're having to live in. And wouldn't it be so much better? Like, people kill themselves over this idea of like not being able to be good enough, not being able to live up to this. You know, people who are, gay and stuff, and feel like this part of me is so bad that I'm going to burn in hell, and they try so hard to get rid of it. And then you've got all these
Mm,
people committing suicide over this stuff, and you don't understand how much those are the same thing and how they're affecting each other, because it does a lot.
yeah, and you're basically, for your own life and maybe your children, you're living a life that's entirely a life of delusion. Like, I say this a lot, but the Matrix. Like, Neo opens his eyes and he says, "Why do I hurt so much?" And Morpheus says, "You've never used them before. Like, you thought you were living. You've never lived a day in your life yet." And that's like,
Yeah.
do you really want to ruin your life and other people's by literally never starting to think and have an identity, even, to have an identity
Yeah.
apart from this crazy Yahweh character and all the blood magic scapegoating stuff. Like who are you
Yeah.
without this mythology?
Absolutely. The identity thing is such a huge part of it. My identity for most of my life was that. And it's like any part of you that is you is bad. And, that struggle of, God, take this away from me, take these thoughts away from me. Any desires that I have that are not yours, take them away from me. You you're not allowed to have your own identity. You don't get the freedom to have your own identity, because you're literally taught that your identity is God. He
Hmm.
is your identity. So, yeah, identity is a very big part of it. And I feel like I'm still very much going through the process of trying to figure out my own, and figure out like who I am, because I've suppressed it for so long. And now, like, Erica's trying to come out and slowly coming out. And it's like meeting a whole new person, and having the freedom to be able to do that is a really wonderful experience for sure.
Hmm. Was there anything that you particularly thought through philosophically or studied that helped you to realize that it wasn't real? Or how would you phrase that? Would you agree that with the idea that, to say, the Christian worldview is not reality, it's not real, it's mythological? Would you agree with that? And if you would agree, what would you say were some of the philosophies and things you learned that enabled you to say that, with being able to defend it and say, not only am I walking away from this, but I can tell you really good reasons why I walked away? Was there anything like that comes to mind?
There were a lot of things. I think one thing that was big for me, as I was kind of at the beginning of my deconversion process, I started going down conspiracy theory rabbit holes, like on
Hmm.
YouTube and stuff. And basically, it sort of opened my mind up to believe a lot of different things. Um, and with that, I started learning about different religions, um, that would come into it. Now, different religions were things we did not learn about. You get like little kind of basic things, but they're always formed in a way of like, well, some people believe differently, but this is exactly why that's not true, and you need to stay far away from that. So,
Hmm.
like, another reason why to have us homeschooled, you don't get to go to religion class. You don't learn about any of that. So the conspiracy theories kind of turned into other religions, and I started seeing how so many religions are based on the same ideas and kind of fall in the same line, like the fact that Jesus isn't the only risen savior, stuff like that. Like, wait, what? And so then you start falling down the hole of, okay, well then, so basically figuring out, I believe what I believe because of where I was born, who I'm around. And if I had been in another place, I would have learned something different, which as a Presbyterian kid is a very scary thought, because it's like, oh, all those people, like, they don't have a chance. So it's like, thank goodness I'm in this place. But then as an adult learning this stuff, it takes you to, well, so I only believe this because of where I am and what I've been taught. What if I was any of those other things? And then also, these religions are all so similar. So basically, how do you know which one is really real?
Did you
And
ever
then,
actually get the like ask people about that idea like with other countries? And I guess what I'm asking is, have you ever heard the idea that like if you really were part of the elect and say had been born in Iran or Saudi Arabia where you would have otherwise believed in Allah, or if you were born in some other country and believed in some other deity, that God would have chased you down. If you were one of the elect, God would have chased you down. He would have found a way to get the gospel to you in the heart of Iran or Saudi Arabia or something, and he would have made sure that you knew the gospel before you died. And
yep,
it's like, I mean, they come up with they'll do anything to come up with some way to defend what they believe. It's amazing.
that's where the missionaries come in, and they're trying to, again retranslate the Bible into even more languages and make it even more confusing. Um, yeah, that was definitely a part of the teaching I learned for sure.
Hmm. That's a great point too you made earlier about the comparative mythology where other groups have dying and rising savior gods, many of them, and many of the ideas are eerily same-ish. Like you like I can't quite say you copied it like it was plagiarism, but it's pretty close, almost to the point of like this clearly had an influence, or at
Yeah.
least or at least these two religions were influenced by some other conversation at the same time. Because like Mithraism, for example, you get initiated into the mysteries of this mystery cult through baptism, and as soon as you're baptized, you have a communal meal with bread and beer, or bread and wine, and then you immediately become one of the brothers and sisters of this group. The fictive kinship. That's
Hmm.
exactly what Christianity had. You start by baptism, you have a communal meal, you become a brother and sister of the community. Um, I mean, that's just super, super one tiny little snippet. There's endless stuff you could talk about there, but it's amazing to me that the parallels. And if you're not used to it, like you've never studied it shocks you at first. And of course, you get the apologetics perspective. Oh no, but Christianity was so different, and it so wasn't. But
It's so not.
it's so not. And it's kind of like the whole. There's so much proof for the resurrection of Jesus, and like there so isn't. But you get all this crazy ideas, but once you actually just come at it with a very honest perspective, you're like, wow, this stuff has so many parallels. It
Yeah.
shakes you up.
Yeah. I think another thing too, and it was one of the things that kind of one of the last straws that really broke me down, when I was still trying to be in church, um, was, where did the Bible come from?
Hmm.
Okay. So it's supposed to be the breathed word of God. Okay. So then how do we know that these specific books, because I know like Catholics have some of the books that we don't. Well, how do we know that the specific books that were picked out and given to us are the real true word of God? So I asked my pastor that, and he's like, so there were people, bunch of men who studied this, and basically were able to put it together, figure out what matched up, and there you go, the Bible. And it's like,
Huh?
okay, so basically, you just found some old text, which there's way more than what you have. And you're like, these will work together. Let's make it a religion. Like, or keep falling with this religion that's been evolving over time. And then throw in the layer that these have been written and retranslated so many times. Um, Even kings have come in and taken it and figured out how they want it to be. You know, and so at that point, it's like, well, how do I know that this that I have right here is actually from God? You know, you can't.
Yeah. And some of those decisions about what was in the canon were made hundreds of years after they were supposedly written. I mean, some of these decisions about the New Testament canon were made in the 400s AD. I mean, like what? And some of them, like you said, there were a lot of other texts. I mean, there's over 40 or 50 gospels. There's at least 6 books of Acts. There's a whole bunch of different books of Revelation. And
Yeah.
there's other books that some groups have, like the Ethiopian church. They've always had the Book of Enoch. They've never lost it. And
Yeah.
you get into that stuff and you're like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. like it,
Mhm.
if God is not the author of confusion, this sounds like utter confusion. I mean,
Mhm.
that's
It is.
before you even get into what's in the text, but just to say
Yeah.
which, if you just assign them names, and a lot of them, they just literally assign them a name. We don't know who wrote them. Like, that's an issue. There's, we don't know. There was no Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were just given to the books, but like, you don't know who wrote them. You don't know when they wrote them. You don't know how they were redacted. And there's a whole bunch more. And you're going to call some of them pseudepigraphical, where you clearly think this one says it was written by Paul, but you're going to say, no, it was written by someone else, pretend to be Paul. So we're going to discount that one. But you're sure that the ones that you have that say they're written by Paul or Peter or whatever, they're definitely written by that person.
Mhm.
And you decided that hundreds of years after they were supposedly first written, in an era
Mhm.
when science and skepticism was not prevalent and textual
Where
criticism
most
wasn't
people
available.
didn't know how to read or write.
Yeah. And there
There's
was an
also
elite
that.
group of people deciding these things, heavily politicized, with starting with maybe with Constantine and all that. Like, really, like, you really don't question the narrative. And I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. That's one of the biggest issues out there. And people
Yeah.
honestly just bury their heads in the sand. They're like, God did it. God gave us His word. Why would I question the God of the universe?
But that is why it's so important to, when you're in church, it's so important for you to be taught. You go to church to reaffirm this every week. You hang around other Christians to reaffirm what you believe. Don't you don't listen to the stories of atheists, of gay people, of people who have different experiences than you. You listen to the people within your church, and that is your entire world, and they have to do that in order to keep you in. And it's basically kind of laid out as, this is how you stay faithful. You don't want the devil to influence you and stuff, but really what it is you have to stay in that hole in order to continue to believe it so wholeheartedly. Because if you
Hmm.
question, you start putting together these things and going, well, okay, I'm believing the Bible is the real word of God, but we don't even for sure know who wrote it. And a lot of these were written a long time after it happened. And another thing that always bothered me too was, you read the Old Testament, especially, God would come and talk to people. He'd
Hmm.
have meals with them, like Abraham, he met him on the mountain, stuff like that. Um, he had conversations with people. So why, at the end of this Bible experience, did he suddenly shut down and become a thought in your head? you know
Hmm.
it's like I go back to memes. I love memes. I saw this one about, God performs all these miracles, people create cameras. Well, I'm not doing it anymore then. Like,
Yeah. And going
let's
back
think
to
that through.
the hell issue, like, if there's that much at stake, can't God just talk to you? Just come for 5 minutes. Give me 30
Yes.
seconds. If there's that much at stake and you love me that much that you want to be the dad of the millennia, so to speak, the dad of all
Yeah.
time, the best daddy in the world, um, then if there's that much at stake and I'm about to burn forever and ever and ever, you know that if you, as God, pierced time and came into my room and said, Tim, I don't know why you're struggling with this. It's not that difficult. It's really easy.
Yeah.
You've had all you need, but for some reason you're struggling, and I cannot bear the thought of you going to hell. I'm going to
Yeah.
give you 30 seconds of heaven, and it's going to clear up everything for the rest of your life, because I will not
Yeah.
let you perish. I don't want this. You are too precious to me. You used to love my gospel. I don't know why you left, but I want to make sure you know it is real. It is so real. And this I cannot let you out of my hands. I've you know, I gave you to Jesus. I put you in Jesus's hands, and I will never let someone pluck you out of Jesus's hands. I will protect you until the, I started this work in you, and I will take it to the day of completion. I'm going to give you a glimpse of glory, 30 seconds. And when you see what heaven's like and you see my holiness, you
You'll
see that I'm
understand.
real. You'll never question it. And
Yeah.
I will protect you from hell. It never
Yeah.
happens.
No, it doesn't. And but that's the promise that you're given, basically. When you're in evangelical Christianity, that is the promise of, I will give you these things and it will be so clear to you, but it's not.
Hmm.
But then when we leave, the ones that are still in it are like, well, how can you not see? You can't even see. You're just trying to convince yourself you can see because you're scared of hell. Like, if we break it down, that's pretty much most of the time the case.
Yeah, it's carrots and sticks. Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
um, I was going to mention one thing that I wanted to ask you about, the issue of philosophical issue of suffering, but in terms of just wrapping up the part about the Bible, the thing that I always love, and it seems like everyone's got a little snippet of something that they've studied, but a lot of Christians just don't realize where this thing came from, not just in
Yeah.
terms of the
Nope.
books that were chosen, but the content. Do you have anything like that that you studied that was just eye-opening to you about what was actually in it in terms of where it was copying from, not just generically about concepts, but actual just literally copying from some other source?
I haven't studied it as much as I would like to. I'd like to do more studying of that because the more and more I discover and hear people talk about and stuff, I've kind of been kept in that hole of like, you have to believe it because it's true. So I've kind of tried to come out of it, and I'm learning a little bit, that something that I've really enjoyed using as a helpful thing to break down thoughts is I'll listen to things like the Atheist Experience or The Line, these call-in shows on YouTube where you can actually debate with people on this stuff. And they've talked about the fact that there are writings and teachings and stuff that are even older than the Bible. And
Hmm.
I want to look more into it and see what those things are, because it's fascinating, because it's something that you'll never learn if you just stay in the bubble of Christianity. You don't question it. You
Yeah,
just believe it's true.
it's so true. And I was going to make a quick plug here. A couple of channels that have made a big difference to me. One of them is called Myth Vision on YouTube. Derek Lambert does a fantastic job. Also, Dragons and Genesis with Jason Folks. Myth Vision and Dragons and Genesis will absolutely open the rabbit hole for people that don't know. And just to give you people a taste of it, when you really dive into this, you're going to find out that the Gospel of Mark is structured according to the constellations of the zodiac in the right order. You're going to find out, and you'll never hear that in church. You're going to find out that Luke and Acts appear to be a rewrite of the Iliad and the Odyssey in many of the sections, and they literally at times quote from the Iliad and the Odyssey. Same exact stuff, quoting and structure connections with Virgil, with Euripides, with the Bacchae. Lots of stuff from Pythagoras, John 21, the pulling in the 153 fish. That's
Mm-hmm.
it's such a weird thing. Like, why would they count the fish instead of sitting with, like, we finally have a chance to sit with Jesus. Like, no, let's stop and count the fish. How many did we get? We know we got a whole bunch, but we need to count them. Oh, it's exactly 153. Oh, well, that's a Pythagorean magic number. And Pythagoras had a story that was almost identical to the story of Jesus with the fishermen. It's like Pythagoras is all over, Luke 2, Revelation. Pythagorean magic numbers are all over. And you find out the Essenes were Pythagoreans. Interesting stuff. But, endless, endless things. Jesus quoting the Dead Sea Scrolls, Community Rule Book, the War Scroll, all this stuff, the Temple Scroll. Like, what's Jesus doing quoting the Qumran community books? All kinds of stuff. We could go on and on about it. Lots of stuff, copies from Plutarch. But when you dive into this, you realize you're not reading what you thought you were reading. You think you're reading, Jesus
Right.
and the Sermon on the Mount. You're reading him quoting someone else, and it floors you because you realize what it does is it humanizes it. You're like, this is a clearly human, as in not divine, clearly human only book, It's
Yeah.
clever, maybe at times, very clever, and of course, there's some good stuff you could take away, like turn the other cheek, forgive people, certainly. But a lot of it is even that is often quoting Plato or Socrates. You don't need to go to Jesus with all this blood magic and hellfire stuff. You can go to Greek philosophers and get the same messages. But
Yeah.
if you do read the Bible, the New Testament, you're often not even getting Jesus when you think you're getting Jesus. You're getting Plato and Socrates and Aristotle woven right in without you knowing it. It's fascinating stuff. Could I ask, before I wanted to save the end to talk about what life's been like after your deconversion, but did you think through at all the whole idea of suffering, like kids dying of cancer at age 2? Did that play a part at all in your deconstruction?
It was a very, very, I remember actually the first time that ever really, really hit me, the idea of why is God allowing this to happen. We had a family in church, faithful, beautiful family. Like, not only were they good Christians, they were good people. And more than anything, they wanted a child. And for years, I watched them go through this struggle of, I want a kid, I want a kid, I want a kid. Ended up adopting some children, which was another long process of they think they're going to get a kid, they don't get that kid. And, I watched them go through this tormented journey. And then they got pregnant. And this was like this huge miracle. And then she lost the baby. And that was a break for me of like, and I remember exactly where I was when I found out this has happened. Like, I can picture it perfectly. And I'm like, I was 18 years old and I'm thinking, why would God allow that? Like, this literally makes no sense. You've got this couple that has been so faithfully to you, and you're gonna like give them this taste and then kill their kid. What? Um, the idea of, it was never specifically children for me. It was people in general, the amount of suffering that goes on. And I am a very empathetic person. And so it's like you were talking about with thinking about Jesus on the cross and feeling that pain and, taking that upon yourself as like your responsibility. So when I think about, like you said, children dying of cancer, the abuse that I went through, the abuse that I've seen other people go through, the idea that children are literally kidnapped and tortured, raped, taken advantage of by family members in Christian homes, the things that I've seen happen in church, the amount of people I have gone to church with that were violating people within the church. And it's like, why? Why? How could God allow this to happen? Because
Mm.
if you honestly believe God is real and God's seeing all of this, then God is in the nursery right now watching this little baby get molested during a church service.
Mm.
And that's just going to happen.
And the idea is always portrayed as God's going to turn it into something glorious someday.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's unbelievable the way the little tricks we would use in that time to trick ourselves to let this stuff go.
It's what you focus on.
Yeah.
So, for example, one thing that kind of broke it down for me is every Thanksgiving, my family reads the story of Squanto and how like his entire tribe is taken, killed, kidnapped, whatever, and taken like across the sea, and then he ends up coming back, and because he's learned the language, he's able to help the Indians and the English like bond together. So they're like, oh, it's redeemed. And I sit there listening to that story and I'm like, well, what about the rest of his tribe? What about where they ended up? Like, we're just gonna forget that ever happened? And in religion, you do that with all kinds of stories. You focus on, you've got all these people on the streets doing drugs and dying from this and struggling and alone. And but that one person that's able to get out and show up in church and give their testimony gives them like hope for everybody. Oh, that's the purpose. That's why God's allowing this to happen. What about
Mm.
all the other people? What about the people on the street that are homeless that you don't even want to give money to because they might use it for alcohol? Let them have some alcohol there on the street. Give them
Yeah.
something.
I think the place that comes out to me a lot too is, do you ever see pictures of mostly Christians, I think, that post them, but they might be decorating like their hearth or a hallway, or some kind of project where they're being redoing a room, or making an addition to their house or something, or taking inspiration from Etsy or Pinterest or something, and they'll come up with this really nice little layout of their home. They'll put up the pictures, and a lot of times, a lot of them will say something like blessed, or they'll put up a picture, and they'll hashtag blessed in the posting,
Hmm.
and it's like, well, wait a second. I thought we all agreed and knew that there are thousands of kids who die of starvation, I believe, every day. So like,
Yeah.
so God's blessing you with the ability to, you know, go out to Hobby Lobby and buy some really nice things to hang on your wall, and this beautiful house in a safe neighborhood and plenty of food to eat. So you're blessed, but God's just saying to the whatever 25,000 kids dying a day, sorry, screw you. Like, I'll make it right in glory, but otherwise you're just going to shrivel up and die. Like, that doesn't, it's the idea of being able to say to these situations, that doesn't sound right anymore. It might have sounded right before for whatever reason. Maybe I didn't question it, whatever. Maybe I didn't think about it enough, but it doesn't sound right anymore. And I'm not comfortable proceeding. And it's funny how a lot of this comes back, for me at least, to the idea of abuse and recovering from trauma. But if you were to say to somebody, like if you're in a relationship with a spouse, say, or boyfriend, and you're like, okay, what is happening in this relationship, the way I'm being treated, maybe I let it go before, maybe I didn't stand up for myself, didn't take my power or whatever, but now I just want to say, I'm putting my stake in the ground. This doesn't feel right anymore. I'm not saying that I'm divorcing. I'm not saying I'm going to, lash out at you. I'm just saying this doesn't feel right. And I want to kind of create a boundary. I want to say,
Hmm.
I need to figure out why this doesn't feel right. And because right now I know I can't proceed. I can't be whatever. I can't accept this as the way to live my life. And for a lot of situations, like if it was abuse, if say a woman's being battered or whatever in a marriage, you would say, absolutely support her ability, to support her power to say, I will have a boundary. And
Hmm.
this, if this doesn't feel right, say it, speak those words. It just doesn't feel right anymore. I'm not going to be comfortable until I figure out what's right here. And yet when it comes to faith, you can say the same thing and say, I'm not comfortable with this. The idea of God seeing priests molesting little boys, and God saying, well, I'll fix it in heaven. I'm not comfortable with that anymore. Whatever issue it is, kids dying of cancer, or even just saying, not even current stuff, just Old Testament genocide and slavery stuff. I'm not comfortable with a God who says, if you have a slave, you're allowed to beat them, and as long as they get up off the ground within 2 days, you don't get punished. You only get punished if they die within 2 days, or you can bequeath your slave to your children and because of your property. I'm not comfortable with that anymore. You say that to a Christian, it's like alarm bells. What the hell is wrong with you? Why won't you bow your knee to God? Like, I'm not comfortable anymore. I feel like I'm being threatened by your God, by your doctrine, by your theology, by your church. I'm claiming my power to say, I will step up and protect my own my own ability to think and live and breathe and thrive. And yet for a lot of Christians, like, that is absolute treachery. It's apostasy. You're a traitor to the gospel. And I want to encourage people, and I'll pass it back to you in a second. I just want to encourage people, take that power. If people are saying, oh, you just got to believe, you got to trust God, you got to let it go, God's got a reason for it, he'll make it good and glory. If it doesn't sound right, just keep saying that to yourself. There's a splinter in your mind. Focus on it. Don't push it aside. Don't say, oh, I'm just going to trust God. I need more faith. You don't need more faith. You need more skepticism.
Yeah.
Skepticism and doubt is the virtue. Question it until you figure it out. Anyway, if you want to respond to any of that, and then I wanted to ask if you could to maybe wrap us out with what it's been like, since your departure. Like, what, because a lot of people have a whole new journey there too.
The one thing I will say in regards to what you just said, in regards to people being in marriages, for example, and wanting to set boundaries, um, in the religious circles, you're going to get told, no, you got to pray about that. Let God deal with that. You don't get to stand up for yourself or have those boundaries.
Yep.
But
Or submit.
so there's
Just
that.
submit.
Exactly. Um, as far as sense, um, relationships are hard. Um, I have people that have just completely unfriended me, won't talk to me, whatever. Um,
Hmm.
there are plenty of people who just have a hard time with it. There are some people who want to, come in and be like, I'm really sorry this happened to you. I hope you, discover, find your way back or whatever. Um, uh, it was really hard in marriage because my husband is still, he still does consider himself a Christian. So that was a hard thing for us to work through. We had a lot of issues we had to work through, and we had to get to that point of mutual respect. Me understanding that you're still a Christian, and I'm not going to give you a hard time for that. I'm not going to try to hold you back from doing that, and just asking the same thing in return. And I think we have gotten to that point where we can kind of talk about things and stuff. Um,
That's
there
awesome.
were a lot of really lonely times where I couldn't really talk to anybody at all. And those were the times that I was able to go to my online friends, people that I've never met in person, but I've met online, and we've bonded over these particular issues. And without that community, I don't know how I would have gotten through all that.
Hmm.
So things are a lot better now. I'm a lot more confident in myself and who I am, and understanding that who I am isn't bad, and that's okay. And that if someone has an issue with it, that's their issue. That's not my issue. And I don't have to take that on anymore. So
Hmm.
it's still a lot. There's still plenty that I'm still working through. A lot of therapy.
Do you feel
but
like you've been able to kind of, like we talked before about, you kind of lose your identity, or your identity gets wrapped up in the whole Yahweh and Jesus gospel stuff? Do you feel like you've been able to kind of reshape and just not even reshape, but just figure out who Erika has been all this time, maybe hiding behind the veil, but just who you are and what you like and what you want your life to be about? Has that been easy or hard, or what's that been like?
it's something I'm still working on. It's definitely still a journey. I've learned a lot more about myself. And I think coming to the point of realizing that I don't have to have a purpose, and I don't have to have like, if I just want to like be with my family and go to work and come home and just have a normal life with them, like that's okay. It doesn't have to be this big magical thing. If I want to, do stuff online, if I want to, do things like create an audience, write my books, whatever, that's okay too. And it's not bad for me to want that.
Hmm.
So that's definitely helping. And I'm learning a lot more about myself, and accepting that about myself, and embracing that about myself. Um, but
That's
I'm
awesome.
definitely still a work in progress for sure. And there's a lot more that I'm unraveling and figuring out, working through. And um, I don't know if that's something that'll reach kind of a point where it's like that is what it is, or if that's a continuous thing. We'll find out. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a journey. Well, it's so cool to just be able to at least have the chance to say, for whatever amount of time I've got, whether it's 5 years or 50 years, whatever time I've got on this planet, I am going to live it free from the shackles of a mythological worldview that is, not just, it's not good mythology even. It's it's ancient
Yeah,
Canaanite mythology and Greco-Roman mythology, like bad ideas, all this stuff. And
yeah,
to say I'm gonna claim myself to be, the human that I am. I'm free of these bad ideas from people that lived long ago that didn't know much about anything about the way the
yeah,
world works, and just to be able to start over. And it's such a cool thing to me, at least, to think I know there's so much I need to learn, and it's not like I'm some genius, but at least I'm not absolutely entrenched in delusion. At least I've got a shot at reality. I've got a shot to ask the right questions and to be okay with the ambiguity, to say I don't have all the answers, like you said, like that's
yeah.
okay.
And
But
that is okay. It's learning that it's okay to say I don't know, and that it's also okay to accept people and love people, and you don't have to put conditions on that.
hmm, that's a great point. Yeah. Can I ask just one last question about your
Yeah.
this process? Did you find with the, you mentioned, some trauma and anxiety. Did you find, despite some of the harder parts of it and the therapy and so forth, did you find any level of peace? And like, what at what point did any peace come, if you had peace, and what is it like compared to your time in Christianity?
I think just the simple fact that I don't go to sleep at night fearing that if I die tonight, where will I end up? That alone, not having that fear in me, creates a lot more peace.
Mm.
Um, I I'm definitely an anxious person. I think a lot of that comes from, if not all of it, comes from my raising and stuff. So peace is not a word I often use, but there is a certain level of peace in not having that fear and torment and stuff. There's also still the level of working through it and having to process all that trauma that is still there and still affects me to this day. But I have a lot more peace, I think, within myself, and just being settled in the fact that like we already said, what I don't know is okay, and I can still learn, or I cannot learn. I could close the book right now and be like, you know what? I'm comfortable with the fact that I don't know things. I just want to live this life, and then, that's it, and just live it to the fullest and leave it at that. Um,
Hmm.
that kind of feeling of the freedom to just let go is definitely peaceful.
Hmm. Yeah, living life to the fullest and leaving the planet better than we found it, hopefully.
It's what we try.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to wrap up by saying thank you so much. And by the way, I should say first, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to add before we wrap up? Did we cover
I don't think
everything?
so. I mean, there's always more to talk about, but this was a great conversation.
It's amazing how often I've even had people that they'll be like, "There's no way I could talk for 2 hours. I'd cover everything in an hour." And almost every time after 2 hours, everyone's like, we barely scratched the surface on a whole bunch of topics. But
Absolutely.
it's amazing. Well, I will just end then by saying thank you so much to Erika Sams for your story. If you all again can, please go check out her links, which will be beneath the video. You have a blog, you have an Instagram, you have a TikTok, which
Find me on TikTok.
find her on TikTok. You have a website, which I'll include there. And I just want to say again, thank you for sharing your story. I know that some of these topics are very painful, but being able to go through it like this, I think helps other people that either went through it themselves and are still healing, or maybe people that are still in it or haven't even started this journey. They're just like, I'm just curious what people are doing. What are atheists saying? And maybe they've never even explored the idea that there is a whole other side to this. And I believe that your story is going to encourage some people in their journey wherever they're at. So thank you for your bravery and thank you for your story and thank you for sharing with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.